So I'm Dan Baumgartner, board member, pastoring right now in Santa Rosa, California. That's just a little north of San Francisco. I'm always amazed, you guys, at how many people in the South and the East have never been to California. It's amazing. So if you just drive west, you'll eventually hit it, just to be clear. Hey, we missed one introduction earlier. Mike listed a couple of our part-time staff folks, and there's one other, and we forgot because it's so brand new, a former board member who is now functioning part-time as coordinator for connections and recruitment, and that's Ray Garcia. Yeah. So we wanted to try something just right out of the chute tonight. We've got our three main speakers for this weekend. We have all sorts of other breakouts and stuff going on, but our three main speakers are all here, and we thought it would be fun just to get to know them and have a little bit of a panel discussion up here with them. And that way, as they begin to share in other venues over the course of this week, you'll kind of know who it is that we're listening to. So how about if you three come on up? Get your mics, please, and turn them on. We have these amazing living room chairs here. Just it doesn't matter where you sit. Okay, so let me give a quick introduction. So right here on my left, Alycia Wood. Alycia Wood. Alycia, not Alicia.
No.
Alycia Wood.
It's my mother's fault, not yours.
There you go. She grew up in Rochester, New York. Always a question asker, always looking at big questions of life. Ended up studying criminal justice and sociology at Roberts Wesleyan in Rochester, and discovered that her deep hunger for the big questions of life actually sort of had a name, and it was apologetics. So she did go on and do a master's in social justice. She's been around the world serving in different capacities. She served as a teacher. She was able to spend a year studying apologetics in England and then worked with RZIM for 8 years. She spent the last 9 years doing full-time apologetics ministry, traveling, talking about things relevant to the culture. And she's currently with a group called Apologetics, Inc. In her spare time, if she ever has any. She's an avid sports fan. We'll find out more about that later.
Yeah.
She's a musician, and she loves things that are growing in her garden. So would you please welcome Alycia Wood. Super glad you're here. Okay, next to her is Andrew Root, but he has given all of us permission to call him Andy, so you can do that. Grew up in the Twin Cities area and lives still in St. Paul, Minnesota with his wife, Cara, who is a Presbyterian pastor. Wow. Kids Owen and Maisie, and a dog. Did his PhD work at Princeton Seminary, who is one of our exhibitors here, and is now professor of youth and family ministry at Luther Seminary. You've worked, Andy, in parachurch groups, you've worked in social service groups, you've worked in congregations. But what you really need to know about Andy is he just can't stop himself from writing books.
Right.
Like, I tried to count up how many of them there were, and I think I lost count about 20. So he's still going strong in that regard. The most current ones are a 6-volume series on ministry in a secular age.
Wow.
So you'll want to check that out. When he's not writing or reading or teaching or speaking, he says he spends way too much time watching TV and movies.
Wow.
So we're going to have to hear more about that later. But please welcome Andy Root. Okay, Dwight Radcliff. Hi, Dwight.
What's going on, Dan?
Hey. I am happy to say I got to know Dwight in the 10 years that I was in Los Angeles. Dwight's been down there doing all sorts of things. He was a deputy and a chaplain with the LA County Sheriff's Department.
Yeah.
He graduated from Fuller, planted a church called the Message Center that our church, Hollywood Presbyterian, was able to share ministry back and forth. They taught us a lot. Still leads there with his wife, Deshawn. They have 2 daughters he's pretty proud of. You might want to ask him about that. Dwight also was a speaker at our gathering in Tulsa, Oklahoma a few years ago. But a lot has changed since then. Dwight finished his PhD at Fuller, and I just have to read you his dissertation title. The Message, a Hip-Hop Hermeneutic as a Missiological Model.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
Where do you go with that? He then joined Fuller on faculty as the assistant professor of mission, theology, and culture in 2019. Was named the director of the Pennell Center for Black Church Studies, and in 2020 became the academic dean of the Pennell Center. Did I get all that right?
That's a lot.
Okay, it's a lot. So please welcome Dwight Radcliff. Okay, so before we really start talking, just a little bit more on you guys. Alycia, you said you're an avid sports fan.
I am.
What does that mean?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I was a hockey player for like 20, I know everybody's like, what? But coming from Rochester, New York, right? He's Minnesota. So I just went to a minor league hockey game one day when I was like 12 for my birthday. And I was like, this is amazing. I want to play. And my mother, who had tried her hardest, put me in beauty pageants and makeup school and etiquette school and all these things. When I finally come out and say I'm a hockey player, I want to play, and I was always a tomboy. I think she finally surrendered and just let me be. So I was a hockey fan, but I am a huge NFL fan, and I hail from Rochester, New York. So does anybody want to guess what team?
Bills.
I'm a Bills fan.
Buffalo Bills.
And that means you know the roller coaster of my life.
Oh, man.
Being a Bills fan.
Should we talk about Jim Kelly or?
Yeah, well,
Okay.
I remember those years. I watched all 4 Super Bowl losses. Yes.
Okay, you also said you're a musician.
Yeah.
You love music. Tell us about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I play violin and piano. Violin was my mother's choice. I didn't have rights when I was 4. And piano was my choice. That was my love. But now what's really great is I get to play in the orchestra at my church in Atlanta. So I get to play Sunday mornings with a full 40-member orchestra, clarinets and tubas and violins, bass, cello, everything. It's fantastic.
Wow. Okay, just one more question. Wondering if there's any particular thing right now that's helping you keep your faith in Jesus fresh and personal. Something that's helping with that?
Something that's, I might talk a little bit more about some of that stuff later on today, but I think one of the things in the last couple years has actually just been a growing love for the Old Testament, actually. That has just awakened me more and more the more I dig in. I was a criminal justice major, so I love, clues and connections and, this leads to this, all this deductive, logical kind of reasoning. And I just love the continuation, the framework the Old Testament sets up and all the continuations to new. And that's just gotten me exciting. So I'm like, you can't make that junk up over hundreds of years and have it all turn out right.
Right.
So it just, it's
nice.
fun.
Nice, thank you. Andy, all those books, it's amazing. Does that ever amaze you? Does it ever surprise you that you have ended up writing as much as you have?
I really try not to think about it. I
keep bringing it up.
Right. I don't know. It's I don't know. It's just it's a sickness, I guess, is all I can say. Yeah.
So tell us a little more about the TV movies thing.
Yeah.
So is there something in particular that this group of people just has to see or watch or know about in that realm?
Well, I don't know about that. What I'll say is what I've watched lately. And I do feel like I read for a living, so when my day is done, it's just kind of decompress and watch TV.
Yep.
So we just finished Manhunt on Apple TV Plus, which is about the Lincoln assassination, which was really good. And then we're also just done with season 1. We're a little late on this, but the Mayor of Kingstown. So we're really into murder right now is what's going on.
Got
it.
Great.
A lot of dark kind of murder.
Maybe we should write about
that. It's very upbeat right now.
I don't know if I should ask this following up on that, but a practice that's vitalizing your own faith right now?
Yeah, well, a practice, I have a freshman in college, so that is... got me on my knees in prayer quite a bit. So, Yeah, no, I think there's always a kind of, I don't know, to bring this kind of full circle, I guess. I don't think about writing because I just try to live inside a certain almost monastic schedule. And so part of that is prayer becomes a major piece of it. So I think writing is suffering. It's not necessarily prayer, but just a kind of ordering of my life as always puts kind of prayer as a central piece of that.
Nice,
So,
nice. So Dwight, we mentioned you worked for the Sheriff's Department for a while, you planted a church, now you're in academia, which I'm sure has plenty of challenges.
Feels a little bit like both, yeah.
Feels
like the police and feels like
it's all mixing together.
Yes.
So the work that you're doing now, sure it has its challenges, but tell us a couple things you really love about it.
So as academic dean for the William Pennell Center for Black Church Studies at Fuller, I love getting to do for students what was done for me. So I am a late life academic, don't have a traditional academic background. If my mother were here, she'd be standing beside me and hit me upside the back of my head because I kind of fooled around with my education in ways that did not please her. And so when I came to Fuller, when I applied to Fuller, and my wife is looking at me, when I applied to Fuller, I didn't have an accredited bachelor's degree. So I had to get in under this special status. And I understood later how many people went to bat for me to open the door for me. So that's kind of an obsessive compulsion thing that I've got to, that understanding that somebody else had to go to bat for me. So I find myself constantly going to bat for others when they're not able to walk into some of the rooms I get to walk into. So that's a joy.
Nice.
Yeah,
nice.
That's life-giving.
Just like with these two, it's hard for me to imagine that you have free time, but if you got some free time, like what do you like to do?
I'm not going to look at my wife again.
Should we bring her up here?
My PS5 right now is getting some hours on it. It is. I feel like you. I feel like I've got this massive. I feel like there's a massive responsibility, throughout the day of trying to make the right decisions to impact people's lives. So my guilty pleasures, once I'm done, is the most humorous and nonsensical stuff I can do. So Family Guy, Call of Duty, just anything that has no real life repercussions to it whatsoever.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
There's some witnesses.
Yeah, man, can I get a witness?
Yeah.
Okay. So a growing edge faith-wise for you, or a vital practice that's kind of keeping you grounded right now?
Our daughters are almost 22. They're 21 and 24. And so they keep me grounded. I'll probably say something about them later, but the way they approach faith, there are times where my wife and I, we really are like in deep prayer, like, man, where did we go wrong? What did we do real? And then they say these things, and it just reveals to us like how deeply grounded in their faith they are. It just doesn't look like mine.
Right.
And so I think that's a good thing for me. It keeps me on my toes, and on my knees, I guess, too, but definitely on my toes. Yeah.
Nice. Well, thanks for sharing a little bit of who you guys are with your 300 closest friends here. That's great. I have about 1 million questions that I'd like to ask you, but I showed a little restraint and narrowed that down a little bit. And as I told each of you, I'd love for this to be some discussion and not just me asking questions you answer. You don't have to all answer the same questions. If you want to ask somebody to clarify or argue with them or pat them on the back or whatever, let's have a little bit of a discussion. But so here's the first question, and Andy, just to get us started, maybe you can answer this one. So when you first saw the theme of the conference, which is in but not of the world, engaging culture and thriving in faith, what did you think about? What resonated or made you think how some of your own thinking or experience could speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what jumps out to me, obviously it's a phrase that I'm sure we've all heard in one way or the other, but I think what stuck out to me was both the in and the of, like those two words, in and of. And I'm kind of fascinated thinking about how probably more than likely historically thinking of those words would have some kind of ontological purchase to it, of what does it actually mean to be in Christ. And there's almost a kind of mystical sense of that. And yet, I think what it means to be of this cultural moment, and broadly, I think we'll just stay in the West, is to have a really hard time thinking in kind of ontological categories. So thinking much more in kind of epistemological frameworks, where being in and of means knowing something and kind of conforming to that knowing, as opposed to what it means to be swept up into being. And so and to me, that seems to be a real challenge in the context. Maybe it's something that's a real challenge for Protestants overall, but I think it's a real challenge for late modern people like us, who tend to kind of function in a larger kind of cultural ethos, where just ontological realities don't seem to capture our imagination, where maybe our ancestors in the faith, there was always a sense that you could be overcome by some kind of being. You know, you could walk into the woods and find some kind of being that would overcome you. And we have a hard time kind of understanding what that would mean. So what does it mean to be in and of? How do those have kind of deep resonance with spiritual realities? How are they bound in kind of in a certain form of enchantment? How much is it a good thing that we're not fully enchanted people in some ways? Like, I really like penicillin and, indoor plumbing and things like that. So I don't think I want to be a 14th century person. But there is a certain kind of deficit too of living in a deep, in a deep web of meaning that could be quite frightening and haunting. And so I'm not sure even how to make sense of what it means to be in something and of something, and how that's more than just what I kind of consent to affiliate to.
You other two, one of you anyway. Do you think it's possible to actually strongly engage culture and thrive in this super bitterly partisan world that we're part of? And what are a couple of thoughts you might have on how to do that or do it well?
So it's interesting because the part that stuck out to you was the in and out part, and the part that stuck out to me was actually that part of it, right? This engaging culture and still thriving in faith. And I think I've been an apologist for a long time now, and I think my experience has been different over the years. My talk topics have changed over the years, and I feel like my experience as an apologist right now is I'm kind of in the middle of the culture and the church. And I kind of feel like there is if we go back 60, 70 years, the culture and the church were different, but they were closer, right? And now they are so far apart, right? So the Christians look at the culture and think these people have lost their mind and they're devil worshipers, right? And then the culture looks at the church and thinks these people are the weirdest, oddest people from like the 1200s, and they won't leave me alone, and they're like a hovering parent that's always trying to tell me what to do. Right? And so the two sides almost have like these kind of maybe oftentimes, and I'm speaking obviously massive generalizations here, but it's just when you look at the different things that are going on, you're kind of like, how do we even bridge, right? And so then I feel like kind of as the apologist oftentimes, as I'm engaging with their culture, what I'm hoping to do is help them to realize, well, let's help you understand kind of why they have some of the views that they do. And maybe they'll be a little less weird. And maybe this Jesus they talk about will be slightly more cool. And then also talking to the church and helping them understand, you don't know that without Christ, that you wouldn't look exactly like that. You might want to be a little bit careful, because it's so easy on this side of the cross and on this side of salvation to say, look at them. There's a line in Natasha Cobb's song, a gospel artist, and she says, heaven knows what I would be if it wasn't for your mercy. My sins are now forgotten, yet you remember me. And it's that kind of idea. Who's to say we wouldn't be them? Who's to say I wouldn't be struggling with whether or not I'm male or female if it wasn't for Jesus? have clarity, if I didn't have truth. And so I guess I would say this engaging the culture and thriving faith, as I think it's something that's very important. I think it's something that we all should do. And I think it is challenging, right? Because all of a sudden, I feel bad for a lot of parents. I'm not a parent, but when I was a child, I promise you, I was probably a kid and didn't really get in trouble that much, but my mother never had to deal with whether or not I thought I was a boy. Parents today are dealing with all kind of things, and they're just feeling like overwhelmed. And so I can understand where the challenges are between engaging with the culture and where they're at, and also trying to represent Christ. And I do think that there is a way to do that for sure. And that's kind of, I think, what we're trying to navigate here as people who in this room.
Good. Dwight?
Yeah, I want to acknowledge the great work that the board has done in putting together this particular group. Like, you can hear people's their work and their passions coming through. And I think for me, I would set myself in a different argument. That my argument is that when I first heard it, I was nervous, because coming from a Pentecostal background, there's the abuse of that in and not of. But I think to answer this piece of the question more directly, there's this epistemological issue that I've got with the phrasing of it. There's this assumption that when we talk about urging people to be in and not of, there's this assumption that they're already not of. And unless you are in some type of uber monastic manifestation of Christianity, all of us are inundated with and of the culture. You did not drive a vehicle here that was solely manufactured only by Christians. There were some new outfits I saw earlier.
Award-winning.
But none of them were made exclusively by Christian seamstresses and fabric makers who only had kosher goats and sheep and pulled that's just it. There's an assumption. There's like a blind assumption to some of our statements that we set over and against, or we set separate from, and we're doing this thing sometimes. I mean, we have to do it to a certain degree just to talk about it, but there's a thing that we sometimes don't recognize the extent to which the thing that we're talking about, as if it's over there, is actually right here. And I think part of my job, I hope, if I'm discerning correctly, part of my job is to be that thing. We don't have them anymore because most of us have these dryers that are we don't have the top load dryers anymore, washers anymore, but if we do have them, they don't have this thing in the middle. But there's a thing in the middle, it's called an agitator. And what it was supposed to do was mix up your clothes to make sure that the detergent and the clothing got mixed up. And I want to make sure that we just keep coming back to naming that a lot of the stuff that we're assuming is kind of the stuff that's impacting and infecting us as well.
So you're here as an agitator.
I'm going to agitate a little bit. Yeah, just a little.
Okay.
Yeah.
Andy, any thoughts on sort of how we navigate some of this well, maybe both engaging and thriving?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fundamentally complicated question of what it means. I guess what it means to live is a fundamentally complicated question. But I think when we talk about culture, I think broadly we're talking about both structure and agency. And so culture is somewhat made up of structures and then how human beings act within those. So, I mean, I really agree deeply. None of us, for the most part, opt out of the structural realities that are at play. Like the institutional structures that we all inhabit. There's laws as we go on the road. There's ways that our things are manufactured. But then we have to act within those, and that becomes a big question. Yeah. But I also kind of come from a school of thought that says that even inside of these kind of shared forms of agency and structure we live in, we do have these deep kind of moral imaginations of what it means to live well, what it means to live a good human life. And those are sometimes very explicit for us, and sometimes they're quite implicit. But we're always, that to be a human being, I mean, human beings always fundamentally live in culture, but to be a human being, I think, at least in the philosophical stream that I tend to work in, is that you always are living with some moral framework, whether it's explicit or implicit, there's some sense of what it means to be living well, and your agency inside the structures will be embedded in that form of the good. So it has to lead you to some, it should lead you to some kind of reflex to your neighbor that you very deeply disagree with, that they too are trying to live a good life. And so there, at the very least, I think I have to take on a certain virtue of trying to understand their take on what it means to live well. I mean, they could be really wrong, and I could find myself really disagreeing with them, but we're at a cultural moment where we just don't care about anyone else's take on what it means to live a good life. We think we somehow corrupt our own moral stance if we listen to someone else's perspective. Or I think really what happens is inside the way the structures and our agencies in response to the structures, they've just sped up and they're going so fast that we can't keep up with them, because I think this is part of what the modern project does, is it just keeps speeding up the structural realities. It's part of what it means to live in a machine age and its multiple different derivatives, is that it just keeps speeding this up. And I really, inside of my agency, inside these structures, could really use a shorthand if I should like you or not. Because I don't got time to listen to your story. I have no time to hear your perspective. I have no time to have a conversation across the fence or at the coffee shop where I deeply disagree with you, and I may not even really like you, but let's talk and try to figure this out. Just give me a shorthand, tell me who you vote for, and then I'll know if I like you or not, what news station you listen to.
Right.
So all these things become kind of shorthands because I just don't have time to actually listen to you. But it does, I think, point back to this kind of moral horizon we all have of what it means to live well, and the way we raise our children, the way we do just about everything has some kind of implicit and sometimes explicit assertion on what it means to live a good life.
So a lot of us read, it's probably been 15 years ago now, Andy Crouch's book about culture making, and he talks about not just being, as Christians, not just being culture consumers, and not just being cultural critics, but about actually making culture. Does that resonate with how you guys think about these things?
I'll jump in. So I think nerding out for a minute, laying somewhat of a foundation. Like part of the complication here, right, is that we're using a very simple term that is very complicated. We're talking about culture, right? So whether we go back to E.B. Tyler's, it's the complicated or complex whole. Weber's, it's the, humans are animals suspended in webs of their own creation. Geertz comes back and says, well, it's the webs that are actually the culture. Ray Williams, I think says that no, it's really the meaning systems. And then we get, Andy comes and says, well, just make more culture. And I think that there's something to that, yes, but I think that my footnote to Andy 15 years later would be that it doesn't account for I think part of what we're seeing now is that there's an ignorance to the water we swim in. That as fish, we don't take the water as culture. We don't take the water as a real thing. And so it's not enough to just start making more of something if you don't understand how for me, it's meaning making. That culture, the heaviest part of culture is not just the products, not just the stuff. It's the way that we share. Ting Toomey and Chung say it's this shared meaning system. It's that all of us have agreed somewhat to who Christ is, and that's why we've gathered together. And it's not just that there's a shared lexicon, it's the way we go about making definitions together, the way we go about making meaning together. And if we're not ready to really talk about how we make meaning of something, then we just keep making more stuff that reproduces a way of being or a philosophy or a political ideology or a perspective on the church, and it never allows us to sit back and be critical of how did we get here? How did we get to a place where we are doing A, B, C, D, E, F, whatever? If we never take the time to stop for a moment and say, it's not just about us making this stuff, but why do we have the inclination to make this kind of stuff? Why is this the thing that we like to share more than this? Why are we run by our algorithms? If we don't actually take into account the water that we swim in, I think we just keep making things that just continue to perpetuate our own kind of hidden idiosyncrasies.
Okay, so there's a room full of pastors and church leaders here. What's this mean in daily life? What's it mean when you're dealing with people who are in the midst of a super hostile culture? Bring it down. I'm a simple person. Bring it down. What's this mean for this group? This whole thinking about the culture.
As a pastor, it is, here's where we can use Andy's piece. Moving away from postures and moving into gestures. That postures are the denominational truths. They are the traditional statements that we use. And moving away from those prepackaged cookie cutter answers to everything, and moving into gestures that allow us to actually pause and take the time. Instead of, I need the shorthand, you might actually need to spend some time talking to that individual. Like as a pastor, as a leader, going beyond the label, going beyond the shorthand, you might actually need to stop, unplug, and spend some time. Slow down I forget the wording, slow down that process.
Yeah.
Either of the other two of you have thoughts that are being stirred?
Yeah, I mean, I would just reiterate that, first of all, I think we have to claim some particularity in some moral vision, and not be shy about that in some sense. Like, there is no way to really function in the world without making some best account of what it means to live well. And so that will be collective. So I think communities and churches can make that assertion, and how we help people think about what it means to live well. And what I'm even really more interested inside of that is what it means to be communities that live in a very significant disposition that there is a living God who moves within the world, and speaks and acts. And I do think that both the structure and the agency that we inherit, that we're as much of as any of our neighbors, the presumption, the hermeneutic, if you will, is to presume something else, is to presume more. I mean, I'll talk about this later, but could presume more of an imminent frame than a very open one. And so what does it mean then to go into the world with a certain kind of moral sense that what it means to live well as a human being is to be seeking for God's act within the world? And how do we help people imagine that, and imagine a sense of what it means to live well is to live well before a living, speaking God?
Maybe just one quick thing then, maybe I'll just add on in regards to this idea of living well. I think one thing, and many of you are probably already doing this, but I just think it would be continue to be helpful if we are really dealing with and addressing, if the culture is happening here, right, and all of us are living in the culture, then all of these issues and concerns are affecting the people within the congregation. And they're wondering, how do I deal with this issue? Or how do I respond to this? And how do I love this neighbor well? Or how do I live next to this person? Or how do I, so they're looking for the tangible things as to how to exist within the culture. And so I think becoming familiar with the various, when you say cultural issues or various things that are happening, and being open to talking about them and dealing with those various issues. And I can understand that it's somewhat overwhelming, because some of us, we have a bit of an advantage because we get to spend a lot of time reading and studying and thinking through things, and pastors run around and they're busy all the time. I don't know how you guys come up with messages every Sunday. That would just kill me, you know? Like, I don't even, it gives me anxiety to think about that kind of thing, right? Yeah. And so we get a lot more time to really deal with this, and so I get that it can totally be a challenge, but if it's happening out there, it's happening to the people. And so being able to help them make that connection of how to live well in this world, of being this light, I think is going to be really important.
And there are certain traditions that do that better than others.
Yeah.
And here's where we have to be bold enough and brave enough to learn from each other, to listen to each other. There are certain traditions of the Christian faith that have always viewed view the reality, the lived experience, the embodied experience of individuals as part of what it means to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, to embody the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so how do we not just live in proximity to one another, but how do we actually learn from one another and glean from one another and be in a position where I can be taught by someone else?
Yeah.
Is there, in your own lives, I mean, you three are living in pretty differently from each other, different settings, different contexts. Is there a place in your own life or work where you really feel like you're swimming upstream against the culture? What comes to mind? And what do you do with that?
I mean, I feel like as the apologist, I'm always, I'm the one that's out there, and I'm always going to upset somebody in the audience. Right? I'm going to challenge the Christian and upset them. I'm going to challenge the culture and upset them. So I feel like, do you already
know which one you're going to
I know. I mean, it's like you're telling people maybe what they don't necessarily want to hear. So I think, I do think there's a sense in which you are swimming upstream. And if I'm going to be honest with you, I think a lot of the reason why I'm always, streaming upstream is because of a lot of things that Christians say and do in the public. Christians make my life harder, actually. When I go to universities, I was at MIT in January, I've been to various Canadian universities, and I go to different universities, right? And they see me, and they think, oh, you're like that person I saw on TV, who hates this one, speaks this way, is arrogant, is inconsistent. I thought you're supposed to love Jesus, yet you act like this, or you advocate for this. And so they're gonna well, you're the Christian, I've been thinking through these questions for 4 or 5 years, I'm gonna dump them all on you. Right? And so honestly, my upstream is really a lot of result of the way that I would think that maybe we're getting back to this, where the church maybe hasn't thrived or lived well within the culture. And so that's made things a lot challenging. So I think I'm striving upstream all the time on a lot of the issues. Sexuality, for sure. We've been doing that for a long time. Transgenderism, I've spent the last year plus speaking on transgenderism. I am always swimming upstream, but that's okay when I realize, okay, I know where my foundation is, and I know the truths of the Bible and the text. So I can deal with that, but I find that a lot of my battles are correcting mistakes of the church or things that they've said.
Ooh, I'm going to come back to that. You guys, a place you really feel like you're swimming upstream against the culture?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm someone who can't have friends, is what I feel like. That I just make everyone angry.
Right?
Yeah.
You can't have friends.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, I think, particularly, I think this means in ecclesial circles, in church circles, because the two dynamics I really see across Protestantism, at least in the rooms I'm in, is that we feel like we're in the midst of a crisis. And I think we feel that within the church in the sense of denominational Christianity, can it hold on? It feels like resources and relevance are down. And so we feel like we're in a crisis. And I do think there's something about being Protestant that there's just always a crisis. I think to be Protestant means you're always in the midst of crisis. It's kind of the Protestant imagination in some ways. But I think what we tend to see the crisis as right now is a crisis of decline, that we're in the midst of decline. And so if you are a pastor, you somehow have to stand up against this incredible current that's moving towards decline. It could be cultural conflict. It could just be erosion of institutional realities. It could be all sorts of stuff, but it's somehow you have to innovate yourself out of this, or innovate the church out of this. And that there is a kind of grabbing on to a certain, it's broader than just a Silicon Valley logic, but there is a kind of sense that it's up to you to get creative. And you're going to have to do more with less, and you're going to have to optimize yourself out of this. And you're going to have to lead your staff in doing that, and you're going to have to lead your congregation to do this, and you're going to have to go, and you're going to have to go, and you're going to have to go. And I really think it's a problem. I think it's a deep concession to something that's not so good. Now, on the other side, I think that what I tend to deal with in a mainline seminary is one of the things that needs to be optimized then is, so I would call that side, that innovation side, is that we do, there's a certain kind of ecclesial perspective that could be kind of techno-optimists, that there's some innovation that you can find that will take the downturn and turn it up. You can find it if you can innovate yourself out of this. But then there's another side which is pretty common within our cultural context, and you really find it in mainline seminaries, where the idea is if we can just find more and more affirmations towards different identities, then we also can deal with the same reality. It's decline in some ways, and it's a decline in relevance and resources, and if we can step in, we can do that. And so you hear both sides say things all the time like, the church can do better. The church can do better. The church can do better. This is why I can have no friends. I don't think the church can do better. What I mean by that is I don't think the church is the kind of thing that can either do better or not do better. The church always stands before one question alone. Will it obey or will it not obey? Will it follow Jesus Christ or will it not follow Jesus Christ? Not can it do better, can it innovate itself out of this, or can it become more kind of culturally open that it can welcome.
Exactly.
There's only one question, and this is just where I'm a Bonhoeffer is my spirit animal. And, you know, like
Did you say you were at a Lutheran seminary?
Yeah. I think we do stand before the question of will you follow or will you not follow?
Yeah.
Like that's the question. Yeah. So the church is not the kind of thing, I mean, this is a big statement, that can either do better or could do worse. The question that always stands before the church, and therefore before your ministry, is how do you lead these people in a very complicated moment to obey?
Yeah.
And what does that mean? And that is not a simple question. And I think part of what I think we both worry about with what it means to be in the world but not of the world is that what it means to be not of it is a very simple kind of propositional thing that if you can conform to that, then you're not in it. But that's not it. This is a very different way of living, and it really is a deep hermeneutical question of can we hear Jesus Christ speak again? But that's a big challenge. How will you know it's Jesus? How do you discern that? And especially in this kind of secular age we're in, where that's a very difficult reality. How do you as a pastor lead communities into listening for and responding to the Word of God? And when is it God or when is it wine and NyQuil? You know, like these, maybe it is a vision, maybe it is, you know.
Wait, I thought Dwight was the agitator.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You had me at wine.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I find myself swimming upstream most, and I think there's an echo here. I think I find myself swimming upstream the most in the church. And that's not, I think I find myself swimming upstream the most because there's this trend in the church that we somehow are these isolated things. Yes, is mainline denominational Christianity as we know it in the United States in decline? Yes. Has it been in decline for 30 to 50 years? Yes. Globally, our mainline Christianity globally is in decline? Yes. Is Christianity in decline globally? No. So how do we again tap into where are the places where it's thriving? And again, I don't think this is a question, please don't hear this as this is how we do it better. I don't think it's a do it better. I think there's perhaps something that we're missing, that we're not genuinely following Jesus of Nazareth. I'll name outright, my theology is heavily dependent upon the reality of the incarnation. That God of all eternity, to borrow Peterson, moved into the neighborhood. Like, that's a serious statement, and there are implications for that. Unfortunately, my wife and I have moved several times in our lives, and there are things that you have to do when you move. When I hit yours, your ouch, your pain point, just say amen. You've got to get your mail forwarded.
That's true.
Hate it, because it never works completely.
Yeah, that's true.
We moved in right when the pandemic started, and I still have mail going to my old address. You got to find your new gas station. You got to find your new dry cleaner, your new grocery store. You got to find all that stuff because you're going to be here. And so if we take the incarnation seriously, if we really do move into the neighborhood, what are the things that we need to learn? What are the new habits we need to pick up? Perhaps the ways that we followed Christ. And again, I don't think it's better. I want you to be clear. This is not a how do we do it better. This is not an innovation. This is coming back to how do we follow Jesus faithfully?
Yeah.
And the honest to God answer just might be this. Maybe we're just not following Jesus faithfully right now.
Okay.
So that's why I'm swimming upstream.
I'm hearing you. I'm hearing you. Okay, so these are kind of like short answer, and you've already all touched on these to some degree. So just a sentence or two. Dwight, let's start with you. Finish this sentence.
Yeah.
One thing I wish the American church understood is
that it was the American church.
Okay, you might have to say another
You told me.
sentence or two. I know, I'm giving you two more sentences.
Okay.
Go ahead.
It's not the global church. It's not everyone's church.
Right.
It's not the church of antiquity. I'll probably get run out of here now. I would argue it's probably not the church of the Bible. It's the American church.
Okay.
And there are some things about that are good, but there are some things about that need to be challenged.
Okay. Andy, one thing I wish the American church understood is?
Yeah, maybe this really outs me, kind of working from a certain kind of dialectical frame. But I think the only way to be in the world but not of the world is that you have to have a certain kind of existential reality, that the only way is to die. And so when Paul thinks that, it's because he thinks he's died and he no longer lives, but Christ lives in him. So the very frame of his whole being is that it is Christ's and he is in Christ. So I think that the only way to honor this cultural moment and honor our neighbor is to live really out of the cross, this reality of the cross, and what it then means to see and embrace people in and through their own death experiences, and believe that in the event of really ministering to the world, that there becomes almost something sacramental in that. That when persons can share in each other's lives and move and really bear each other's burdens of death, that life can come out of that. And that the church goes into the world as that kind of mustard seed, as that kind of salt that simply ministers to the wounds of the world, and can do that deeply in the world because it is not of the world, because it has died. We're dead in Christ, and so now we live. So if we take the cross out of this, and the cross not as just a kind of accoutrement of atonement, which it is that, but also as an embodied way of thinking about how God moves in the world. So like for Luther's theology of the cross, it is an atonement reality, but it also is, this is how you spot how God moves in this world. God moves hidden and underneath. God takes what is dead and makes it alive. That's who the God of Israel is. That God is the God who takes what is dead and makes it alive. Yep. And then we become the people who do something this is not one sentence, do something very counterintuitive to this cultural moment, which we continue to put ourselves, the church does and the minister does, put themselves in places of death. Not because we like Norwegian metal and like death, not because we worship death, but we believe that this God moves out of death. And until we're willing to kind of have that existential moment, I think we'll always kind of be pulled into certain cultural camps.
Alycia, one thing I wish the American church understood is
that they are oftentimes culturally tone deaf. Can I add more?
Yep. Andy took like 10 sentences.
No, you can't.
I just wish sometimes we understood how the things that we say sound to a non-Christian, basically. I think, I do tend to weigh on the side of how does this look to non-Christian? How does this sound to a non-Christian? That's just kind of how I've always been. And so I tend to probably weigh heavier on that than on how does this sound to the Christian, or maybe showing as much grace as I could to the church. But I'm always just mindful of the person who doesn't know us, how they hear us. And how do the things that we say, how do the things that we do, how do our actions, how do our thoughts, what does it communicate to those? Because I feel like those are the ones that everyone in here cares about. And those are the ones that everyone in here, we spend all this time thinking through different arguments and philosophies and trying to unpack this Christian theology, not purely for our own amusement, but so that somebody who has no understanding of this can look at this and say, wow, this makes so much sense. This is beautiful. This is good. The God of the universe moved into my neighborhood. That somehow they would see it as beautiful. And my challenge is oftentimes we have a message that's so good and beautiful. And then we say certain things in our cultural tone deaf, and we essentially take that message and cover it in manure and wonder why somebody won't take it and receive it. Because it's covered in so much dirt that they're like, why would I want your God? He hates me. He hates my friend. He wouldn't accept this one. I don't care if he died for me. He doesn't seem very loving. And so that is kind of, I think, where I wish the church would just take a little bit more time to just think that before we speak, before we make statements, before we write things, before whatever we're doing, that how does this sound to the non-Christian who's looking in and they're wondering, is that the family that I want to join?
Okay, so I have one more question for you, but you're standing between us and dinner at this point, so this one has to be really, really close. So something that, I mean, again, you're all involved in different contexts in terms of the church, and it's the church in America we're talking about. So what's one thing that encourages you about the church, the American church in 2024, right now? One encouragement that you've seen or experienced?
Younger adults who are not beholden to their mothers and fathers' version of Christianity, but are hungry for Jesus. That excites me and scares me all at the same time.
Kind of God doing a new thing.
It excites me and scares me all at the same time.
Okay.
Are we both that bad? We can't think of something. Is that what this is?
No.
No. Okay. Go, okay.
Are you ready?
No, you go.
I'm the long-winded one.
That's okay.
No, I think there's a ton of just pastoral practice that is walking with people as they live and as they die, and just bearing the beauty and the burdens of life with people. And I think we keep on thinking there's some way we got to get ourselves out of some kind of hole. And I just don't want us to lose this pastoral practice of what it means to have the privilege, the absolute privilege of helping people prepare to die well. I mean, that's an unbelievable privilege. And there's nothing else in this culture that does that. You can pay someone to do stuff like this, but someone who's going to walk with you like that is amazing. And I think that is happening. Yeah. And I just don't want our anxiety of decline to envelop the faithfulness of all you people who are walking with people as they get cancer diagnoses, as they struggle with mental illness of their children, as they try to figure out what to do now that they've got laid off again. Like, this is an incredible privilege.
I think what encourages me about the church is that the average Christian, so maybe the people that aren't as loud as the others, I feel like are much more. You get such a sense of their views on grace, of forgiveness. They're so much more kind, and this is what I mean by that. So I came out of RZIM, Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. You guys know all about everything that happened there. And one of the things that happened at the end is RZM felt like the whole world was against them, and the whole world wanted them to shut down. Turns out it was just a few very loud voices, but the average Christian was like, hey, I've been there. I have a child who messed up and was unfaithful, or or I've been at a church where this happened with somebody in the leadership. We give it, it's like, we're so sorry. And you realize that the average Christian was like, how can we be loving and gracious to people who fall? And I think that's one of the things that encourages me, is that in the midst of some of the really loud voices that maybe want complete destruction of a sinner, whether it's within the church or without the church, there is a large percentage that is like, we still want to be the light. We still want to represent Christ. We still want to be a church that looks beautiful, that looks attractive, that looks inviting, without compromise, and their understanding. And I think that, to me, was really encouraging, that overwhelmingly people have taken a posture of, we're all fallen. How do we get up and keep going together? And that encourages me.
Yeah, it's going on.
Yeah.
Good. Well, I have a strong suspicion that you're going to get to hear parts of all of this over these next days. So would you just thank them for sharing with us?